The storm had been chasing Mara for miles by the time she spotted the inn. Her wipers smeared rain across the windshield in frantic, useless arcs, and her GPS had long since stopped working somewhere after the highway gave way to a winding back road choked with trees. Brackenridge Inn looked like a survivor from another century, 3 stories tall, with peeling white paint and a wraparound porch lined with rotting railings. It stood alone in a clearing, surrounded by forest that seemed too eager to reclaim it. Mara parked beside a rusted pickup truck that looked as though it hadn't been driven in years. "Just one night," she muttered, grabbing her duffel bag from the passenger seat. She'd been saying it all day, trying to calm herself. She'd left in a hurry after all, left her apartment, left her life, left everything. The porch groaned beneath her as she climbed the steps, boots squeaking. A single light flickered over the entrance. Inside, the air was still and stale, carrying the faint scent of old wood and something metallic. The front desk sat under a grand staircase that led upward into darkness. A bell sat on the counter. Mara tapped it lightly. After a moment, a man emerged from the hallway. He was tall and spindly, his gray suit hanging loosely on his frame. His face was pale, almost waxen, and his eyes, unblinking, seemed to study her with unnerving intensity. "I need a room," Mara said, clearing her throat. He didn't answer. He simply slid an old brass key across the counter. It was attached to a wooden tag, hand-carved. 6. "Just one night," she added. The man nodded once. His lips never moved. Mara hesitated. "How much?" He turned away before she could finish and disappeared into the hallway, leaving her alone with the creaking inn and the growing storm outside. She exhaled sharply. "Friendly place," she muttered to herself, forcing a nervous chuckle. Room 6 was on the second floor. The hallway leading to it was narrow, lined with faded portraits whose eyes seemed to follow her as she passed. When she found the door, she almost turned back. It was scratched, as though someone had tried to claw their way out. The key fit snugly, and with a reluctant push, the door creaked open. The smell hit her first: mildew, dust, and beneath it, something like scorched metal. Inside, the room was dim, lit only by a single oil lamp on the nightstand. The wallpaper peeled in curling strips, revealing dark wood beneath. The bed was neatly made, though the sheets were yellowed with age. She shut the door and leaned against it, closing her eyes. Just one night. That was all she needed. Mara placed her duffel on the creaky bed, the springs groaning in protest. The room felt wrong, like a place meant to hold something in, not offer comfort. She wandered briefly, running her fingers across the warped dresser, the cracked mirror above it, the single faded armchair pushed against the wall. The storm outside grew angrier, rain lashing at the windows in erratic bursts. Somewhere deep within the building, she could hear the wind moaning through the old bones of the inn. She turned up the lamp's wick, but the flame only sputtered, refusing to brighten. "Of course," she muttered. As she set about unpacking her toiletries, she noticed something strange. On the nightstand beside the lamp, there was a small object she hadn't seen before. A brass locket, its chain neatly coiled. She frowned, lifting it carefully. It was ice cold to the touch, though the room was warm. Inside the locket was a sepia photograph of a woman in Victorian dress. Her face was blurred, not by damage, but as though it had never been fully captured. Mara set it down quickly, unease prickling her skin. The whispers started just after midnight. She had been dozing, half asleep, when they woke her, a low, sibilant murmur threading through the walls like a draft. At first, she thought it was the storm, but no, the words were too deliberate, too close. She sat up in bed, heart hammering. "Hello." No answer. The whispers continued, growing clearer. Dozens of voices, hushed but urgent, like people murmuring prayers in a language she didn't know. Slowly, she slid out of bed and pressed her ear to the wall. The sound sharpened, coalesced. "It's not your room." Mara stumbled back, pulse roaring in her ears. She stared at the wall as if expecting it to open up. "This is ridiculous," she whispered to herself. "Just old pipes or wind." She grabbed her phone, but there was no signal. She hadn't noticed earlier. As she considered bolting, grabbing her keys, getting back in her car, something stopped her. The hallway had been silent when she arrived, but now, faintly, she could hear footsteps. Slow, measured, coming from somewhere beyond her door. She held her breath. The footsteps paused just outside. Mara crept to the peephole. Nothing. Her hand hovered over the doorknob. "Don't open it," her instincts screamed. And then, a soft knock. 3 deliberate taps. She swallowed hard, frozen in place. The doorknob began to turn. The doorknob rattled once, as though testing resistance, then stilled. Mara's breath hitched. She stepped back, holding her phone like a weapon, though its black screen offered no comfort. The silence stretched. The storm filled the void, rain pounding the window like impatient fingers. Another knock, softer this time, almost polite. Her mind raced. Maybe it was the innkeeper. Maybe he'd come to, check on her, apologize for his earlier rudeness. But something about that idea curdled in her gut. He hadn't spoken a word. He hadn't even blinked. She forced herself to speak. "Who's there?" No answer. "Look, I'm not opening the door." Still nothing. For a moment she thought the footsteps had retreated. The floorboards beyond seemed empty, heavy with the weight of silence. She turned toward the bed, thinking she'd imagined it all when the doorknob twisted sharply. Mara gasped and stumbled backward. It rattled violently now, the metal clanging against its housing. Someone was definitely out there trying to get in. Her rational mind begged her to shout, to demand that they leave, but no words came. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. No more rattling, no more footsteps. Only quiet. Mara stood frozen, listening so hard her ears ached. After what felt like hours, she crept forward and pressed her eye to the peephole again. Empty. Just a long, dark hallway, with its crooked portraits staring blankly back at her. She waited another minute before engaging the deadbolt with a trembling hand. "Not staying here another night," she whispered. Her voice sounded strange in the stillness, too loud, too small at once. She climbed back into bed, pulling the sheets over herself like a shield. The whispers didn't return, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. It was 3:14 a.m. when she finally drifted into a restless sleep. When she woke, the storm had passed. Pale light spilled through the tattered curtains, revealing dust motes dancing in the air. For a brief, blissful moment, she thought she dreamed it all. The knocking, the voices, the rattling doorknob. Until she saw the locket. It now sat neatly on her pillow. Mara sat bolt upright, staring at it. She hadn't touched it since last night, hadn't even thought about it. Her throat tightened. Someone had been in the room. She grabbed her duffel, stuffing clothes into it with shaking hands. She'd find the innkeeper, demand answers, and leave. The hallway was brighter now, though no less oppressive. The portraits, now clearly depicting men and women in turn-of-the-century garb, seemed even more alive in the daylight, their painted gazes following her with quiet accusation. Downstairs, she found the innkeeper at the front desk, exactly where she'd first seen him. He hadn't moved, as if he'd been standing there all night. "You," she said, sharper than intended. "Did you come to my room last night?" He blinked slowly. "Room 6. "Yes, someone knocked on my door, tried to open it, and," she hesitated, "someone left this." She held up the locket. He glanced at it, his expression unchanged. Ah, that's all you've got to say." He shrugged lightly. "Some things in this house do not belong to you." The words chilled her more than the night had. "What the hell does that mean?" The innkeeper leaned forward. "It means," he said softly, "that room 6 remembers." Before Myra could respond, A bell jingled from the kitchen beyond. "Breakfast," he said, as though that explained everything. The dining room was as empty as the rest of the inn. Dusty chandeliers hung overhead, their crystals dulled by years of neglect. A long wooden table stretched across the room, set with mismatched plates and tarnished silverware. Myra hovered in the doorway, stomach knotted. "Sit," came the innkeeper's voice from behind her. She jumped. He'd appeared without sound, as if conjured by the house itself. "I'm not hungry," she said. He cocked his head. "You will be." Before she could argue, he vanished again. One moment there, the next gone, leaving her alone with the table. At its center sat a steaming breakfast: scrambled eggs, bacon, toast. The food looked freshly made, though she hadn't heard any cooking. Her stomach growled. Against her better judgment, she sat. The eggs were cold. Not just cold, icy. She dropped the fork with a clatter, nausea rolling through her. As she pushed the plate away, she noticed something beneath it: a piece of folded paper. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. In shaky handwriting, one sentence stretched across the page: "Don't stay another night." Her breath caught. "Is this some kind of joke?" she said aloud, though no one was there to answer. She looked toward the doorway, half expecting the innkeeper to appear again. But the room was still, save for the faint sound of rain dripping from the eaves outside. Her mind raced. Was this from him, from another guest? Or from whoever had been in her room last night? Back upstairs, Mara stuffed the note into her duffel and sat on the bed, trying to steady her hands. She needed to leave, but her car keys, she froze. They weren't in her bag. She tore the room apart, emptied every pocket, every zipper, looked under the bed, behind the dresser. Nothing. Her keys were gone. A sharp crack came from the wall behind her, like splintering wood. Mara's head whipped toward the sound. It came again, louder. She pressed her ear against the peeling wallpaper. Beneath the stillness of the inn, there it was again, whispers. Not the chaotic murmur from last night. This was different, slower, deliberate. She couldn't make out the words, but she felt them, a rhythm, like a chant. Her skin crawled. Then faintly through the wall, a child's giggle. Mara stumbled back, clutching the bedpost. "Nope," she whispered. "I'm done, I'm out." She grabbed her bag, bolted for the hallway, and nearly collided with someone. It wasn't the innkeeper. It was a woman. Or at least, it looked like one. She wore a long, old-fashioned dress, stained dark at the hem. Her hair was matted, her face pale as wax. Her eyes were wrong, all pupil. Mara's scream caught in her throat. And then, as suddenly as she'd appeared, the woman blinked out of existence. Mara didn't remember moving. One moment she was staring at the place where the woman had been. The next she was barreling down the hallway, bag clutched to her chest like a lifeline. The staircase groaned beneath her as she took it 2 steps at a time. The lobby was empty. Of course it was. The innkeeper was nowhere to be seen. "Keys," she muttered, breath coming fast. "Need the keys." She tore through the front desk drawers. They were empty, all of them except one. The last drawer slid open with a reluctant squeal. Inside sat her car keys. She snatched them up and bolted for the front door. The deadbolt turned easily. For one fleeting second, she thought maybe, just maybe, she could make it out. She threw the door open and stopped cold. The storm had passed, but the world beyond the porch wasn't the same. Where the gravel parking lot and road should have been, there was only forest, endless, tangled trees stretching into a gray horizon. "No," she whispered. Her car was gone. The inn now stood like an island, swallowed whole by wilderness. She stepped off the porch, heart pounding. The forest floor squelched under her boots. She walked forward 10 steps, 20, 50. When she turned back, expecting to see the inn shrinking behind her, she froze. It was still right there. as if she hadn't moved at all. Mara's breathing hitched. She tried again, this time running, branches whipping against her face, feet pounding the earth. When she stopped, gasping for air, she looked back. The inn loomed just a few feet away. Panic clawed at her throat. She sprinted back inside, slamming the door behind her. The lobby felt colder now, the air heavier, pressing against her lungs. Mara stumbled toward the front desk, intent on finding the innkeeper, when she saw something that hadn't been there before. A door. Not the front door. Another one set into the wall near the stairs. It hadn't been there this morning, she was sure of it. The brass handle glinted dully in the weak light. She reached for it. The moment her fingers brushed the metal, the whispers started again. Closer this time, louder. Not your room, not your room. Mara yanked her hand back, heart thundering. And then, bang, something slammed against the door from the other side. She staggered back, tripping over her own feet. The innkeeper's voice drifted from the shadows above, calm as ever. You shouldn't open that. Mara's head snapped toward the staircase. He stood there, half shrouded in darkness, staring at her. Her voice cracked. What is happening here? He tilted his head slightly, as if the question were meaningless. You said just one night, he said softly. And then he turned and walked back up the stairs, leaving her alone again. By late afternoon, the house had changed. Mara couldn't explain how. She hadn't heard walls shifting or floors creaking, but the hallways were longer now, the turns sharper. When she climbed the staircase again, there were more doors than before, dozens of them, lining the corridor like soldiers at attention. Some of the doors bore numbers, some didn't. She tried to count them, but stopped at 13 when her vision began to swim. This wasn't possible. Room 6 was still where she'd left it, but the brass numbers looked tarnished, as if decades had passed overnight. Her bag lay on the bed where she dropped it, except her clothes weren't inside anymore. Instead, the bag was full of objects she didn't recognize. A silver hand mirror, a bundle of old letters tied with fraying ribbon, a child's wooden rattle. Stop it, she hissed, her own voice sounding foreign to her ears. Stop it, none of this is real. She turned for the door and froze. A figure stood at the far end of the hallway, too far to make out clearly but tall, broad-shouldered, watching. Her mouth went dry. Hello, she called, voice trembling. No response. She blinked. It was gone. Mara backed into her room and slammed the door shut, locking it. Her hands shook so violently she could barely hold the knob. The whispers started again, louder than before, spilling from every corner of the room. And then over them came a child's laughter, high-pitched, giddy. It echoed through the vents. You're still here. Mara pressed her palms to her ears. Shut up. The laughter cut off instantly. The silence that followed was worse. That night she didn't sleep. She sat on the bed with her back to the wall, clutching the locket like it might protect her. Sometime after midnight, the temperature dropped. Her breath came in pale clouds. The doorknob began to turn. Slowly, gently. She held her breath, too terrified to move. A faint knock followed, 3 deliberate taps. Her pulse thundered. Go away, she whispered. The door creaked open anyway. No one stood there. The hallway stretched out before her, longer than she remembered, swallowed in darkness. And then she heard it, soft, bare feet slapping against the wood, running. Coming closer. She scrambled backward as a shape darted past the doorway, small, child-sized, moving impossibly fast. Her throat tightened. The footsteps stopped. A giggle came from just outside the room. She grabbed the door and slammed it shut, locking it again, heart hammering so hard it hurt. The inn groaned around her, as though laughing with the child. She didn't sleep at all. By morning, Mara had made her decision. She couldn't sit and wait for the house to swallow her whole. She needed the innkeeper. She needed answers. The front desk was empty when she stormed downstairs. No sign of him. "Innkeeper," her voice echoed through the warped halls. "I know you're here. You can't just disappear." Silence. Her footsteps echoed unnaturally loud as she marched through the dining room, past the long wooden table now set for a meal that hadn't been there last night. She didn't stop. A door behind the counter led to a narrow service hallway. "Innkeeper." No reply. The hallway twisted unnaturally, stretching longer than it had any right to. She passed doors that hadn't been there before, storage rooms, linen closets, and one that rattled violently as she walked by. She didn't look inside. Finally, she reached a staircase leading down. The basement. The air grew colder with each step. The wood creaked beneath her feet, the smell of mildew and rot growing stronger. At the bottom, the innkeeper waited. Or at least she thought it was him. He stood perfectly still at the far end of the basement, his face lost in shadow. "You," Mara said, trying to keep her voice steady, "you're going to tell me what's going on in this place. Now." The figure didn't move. "Why me? Why are you keeping me here?" "Nothing." She took a cautious step closer. And then the lights flickered, once, twice, and went out. The darkness was alive. The air thickened, pressing in on her. Whispers erupted from every corner, louder than ever, overlapping in a chaotic frenzy. "Leave. Stay. Hours." The words bled together, scraping at her mind. Something brushed her arm. She screamed, swiping at the air, but there was nothing there. The basement door slammed shut behind her. Her breath came fast, ragged. "Stop it," she shouted into the dark. "Stop it." A sudden burst of laughter, high-pitched and inhuman, erupted inches from her ear. Mara bolted forward, toward where the innkeeper had been. Her hands found a wall instead. No innkeeper, no far end of the room. Just endless cold stone. She turned, disoriented. The basement had changed. The stairs were gone. "No," she whispered, chest heaving. "No, no, no." A shadow passed across her vision. Something was in there with her. She pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding so violently it drowned out the whispers. A figure emerged from the black, a tall silhouette, jerky and wrong in its movements. It tilted its head at her slowly. And then it lunged. The shadow lunged, and Mara barely had time to scream before it was on her. Its hands were ice cold and impossibly strong, yanking her from the wall. She kicked and clawed, but her fists passed through it like smoke. "Let go of me," she shrieked, voice cracking. The thing didn't speak. It didn't need to. It dragged her backward, feet scraping across the stone floor. The walls blurred, melting into darkness. She couldn't tell if she was still in the basement or somewhere else entirely. And then she realized. It wasn't pulling her through hallways. It was pulling her through the walls themselves. The air grew tighter, pressing against her chest until she could barely breathe. Her nails dug into the floor, snagging on splinters, but there was nothing to hold. She was being consumed. "No, stop." A whisper, so close it felt like it came from inside her own skull. "You don't belong here." Another voice overlapping. "But you will." Mara thrashed, her body twisting violently, until suddenly the shadow let go. She collapsed onto cold wood, coughing and gasping for air. When she looked up, she wasn't in the basement anymore. She was in a narrow hallway, lined with dozens of doors. Each door had a name etched into the wood. She crawled to the nearest one, Elaine Harper. Another, Jonas Gray. Another, Caroline M. The rest had been scratched out. The hallway felt endless, the names blurring together, hundreds of them. and then one stopped her cold. Myra Holt. Her own name. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, she saw nothing but blackness. And heard, "You shouldn't have stayed." Mara stumbled backward, shaking her head. "No, no, this isn't real." The whispers grew louder. She covered her ears, but they came from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. "We stayed too long. You saw the signs. It doesn't let go." Her knees buckled. "What do you want from me?" she screamed. A chorus of voices answered at once. "Join us." The floor beneath her feet splintered. Hands, pale, skeletal, shot up from the cracks, grasping her ankles. She screamed, kicking wildly, but there were too many. The hallway tilted, the walls shuddering as if the whole house were laughing. And then, the innkeeper's voice. Calm, distant. "I told you one night." "Why are you doing this?" she sobbed. His voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You opened the wrong door." The hands released her as suddenly as they'd grabbed her, and Mara crashed to the warped floorboards, gasping for air. The hallway was silent again. She staggered to her feet, trembling. The door with her name on it had vanished. In its place, more endless doors stretching into the dark. "Enough," she rasped. Her voice sounded small, pitiful. Her boots thudded against the floor as she walked. Left, right, another turn. She didn't care anymore where she was going, she just had to keep moving. The inn was playing with her. It always had been. But then she saw him. The innkeeper stood at the end of the corridor, his hands folded neatly behind his back, his expression unreadable. "You," Mara croaked, her voice breaking. "You're going to tell me what's happening here." He didn't move. "Do you hear me?" she screamed, her voice echoing off the walls. "What is this place? Why won't you let me leave?" The innkeeper tilted his head. "I told you, one night, you insisted on staying longer." "I didn't," Mara's breath hitched. You knew what would happen." His pale eyes flicked to the doors surrounding them. They all did. Mara followed his gaze. The names on the doors seemed to glow faintly in the dark. "The others," she whispered. "The voices, they were guests too, weren't they?" The innkeeper didn't answer. Her chest tightened. "Let me go, please." He finally stepped closer, his polished shoes silent on the wood. "I can't." "Why not?" "Because you're already part of it." Mara's knees nearly gave out. "No, I'm not dead, I'm not." "Death," the innkeeper gave a small, almost amused shake of his head. "Death is simple, this place is not." "I don't understand." "You don't need to," he said softly. "You only need to choose." Her stomach dropped. "Choose what?" The innkeeper gestured toward the nearest door. The name etched into it wasn't hers anymore. Jonas Gray. "Some," he said, "stay behind the doors, trapped but quiet. They become part of the inn. It doesn't hurt." Myra swallowed hard. "And the other choice?" The innkeeper's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You walk the halls, forever, and the inn uses you." Her voice trembled. "Uses me for what?" "To greet the next one who comes." Myra's mind reeled. No, I don't belong here." "You do now," the innkeeper said. "I won't choose either." He turned, already walking away. "You already did, Miss Holt." "Wait," she screamed, stumbling after him. "You can't leave me here." But when she turned the corner, the hallway was empty. The innkeeper was gone. Mara stood alone in the endless corridor, the innkeeper's footsteps fading into silence like a distant echo. The walls around her pulsed softly, the faint hum of whispers seeping through the wood like a poison. Her breath hitched. She tried to move anywhere, but the floor beneath her seemed to shift, the boards bending like ripples on a dark pond. Panic gripped her chest, squeezing until it felt like her ribs might shatter. "Not my choice," she whispered fiercely, but the air swallowed her words. The doors lining the hall seemed to lean inward, eyes watching. Names glowed faintly beneath peeling paint. Elaine Harper, Jonas Gray, Caroline M., and many others whose stories had been lost to time. Her hands trembled as she reached out to touch one. The surface was cold, rough with age, yet under her fingertips it seemed to pulse, alive, waiting. A voice, soft, mournful, whispered inside her mind. We tried to fight, we tried to run, now we wait. The walls bent again, the hallway folding back onto itself, endless and impossible. Mara's knees buckled. She collapsed, clutching her head as the voices swelled, rising into a haunting chorus. Join us, stay with us. Tears streamed down her face as exhaustion overtook her. She could no longer tell where she ended and the inn began. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was a faint figure standing in the distance. The innkeeper, his face unreadable, watching. And then nothing. Weeks later, a hiker stumbled upon the old inn, half swallowed by ivy and shadow. Inside, the front desk sat undisturbed, except for a new entry in the guest book, written in shaky script. Mara Holt, one night too long. The ink smudged, as if written by a trembling hand, or by the house itself. Outside, the forest whispered, waiting for the next traveler foolish enough to enter.